Okay, welcome everybody. Hope you are doing well. We can have a small crowd today. I think we've been in LA, if you've been hearing, having a lot of these fires nearby. They are actually relatively close, but alhamdulillah, we're not in danger, so alhamdulillah for that. But it's been very smoky, and it's definitely been difficult for people to get around, and so I'm hoping that inshallah everybody stays safe. But just if anyone, people have been sending messages, are you okay? And alhamdulillah, we're actually fine for now. But just please keep everyone in your prayers, because it's really dangerous. The way that this has become sort of a yearly event where you're going to have very high winds and a lot of risk for fire. And now we've been this is the third year now in a row where we've been worried about having to evacuate and things like that. And there are a lot of people who have lost their homes and have lost lives and are suffering. So it's important for us to be mindful of that. So and we've been so busy as always. It seems like it never really slows down. So I apologize, I'm going to rely a little bit on my notes because my sleep deprivation is not getting any better, but I'm trying really hard to make that work. And on that note, I figured I would start by just kind of sharing where I am on my social media, like detox journey, because last time I shared that I took the Facebook app and the Instagram app off my phone, and I felt liberated in ways that I never imagined could happen. But like any addiction, it always kind of finds its way to weave back in, and I do have a second phone where I have not removed the apps, and it's become a source of fitna. So when I'm in my weak state, it kind of like comes with me, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll bring the second phone. I make up some excuse. But the good thing is that, with my regular phone, it's like I've made it a little bit more difficult. I can't just click on the app, but I actually have to go in through Google or through Safari, and so I've like kind of tried to cut that instant gratification, so that's always a good thing. I want to say just a few lighthearted things, because before we get into the topic of my talk, because I want to talk about some things that are a little bit serious. But first, I wanted to show off my creative outlet of t-shirts. This says Muslim and Beautiful. And the last time we had the Rami Yusuf talk, I had a shirt that said Usuli and kind of defined a whole bunch of things. And people have actually asked me if they can get these shirts. So I was really excited, because this was just kind of like in my own fun way of just playing around. So inshallah, hopefully I will reach out to people as, like if you could help us with fundraising or a monthly donation or something like that, then you could get a free t-shirt that looks kind of cool and identifies what Usuli is. So anyway, more things. So let's see, the other thing I wanted to just mention again, in the past we've talked about an orphanage in Idlib, Syria, named Little Hearts. And this is one of the things that continues to show up on my Facebook feed. And I'm amazed to see the faces of these beautiful children in the midst of war and getting bombed, and the adults that are there caring for them. And they're always, in need of donations. So if you have the opportunity and you want to, save lives, Little Hearts Kurosini, you can come to our website page and look for the name. They're such a worthy cause to donate to. And the professor and I were talking last night, you see the faces of all of these beautiful orphan children, and you imagine that if there were no adults to care for them, where would they be? They would just be lost. And they're not getting any help from anyone here, from the UN or anything like that. They're really just relying on donations of kind-hearted people that see what they're doing on Facebook. So I really want to just encourage people. I think this is a really beautiful way to help and make a difference in bringing blessing into your own life. So anyway, so in terms of what I wanted to talk about today, again, it's I don't know if it's just my Facebook feed, but I've noticed that I want to kind of go back to talking about some of my experiences as a convert. Back in, I think, January of 2018, I did a little bit of a talk here as an intro about sort of my entry into Islam, how I became open to the idea of Islam, and kind of the sacrifices and the challenges and the journey of arriving at the decision to become Muslim. And at that point, I kind of had said, I feel like these are sort of my own categorizations, but I feel it's like the journey in Islam for a convert, could be sort of identified as 4 stages. And I talked about the first 2 stages being, one, just being even open to the idea of Islam, and maybe religion in general, just looking and searching for something. And then making the decision to kind of start on this path of learning more about Islam as a faith and what it takes, and oftentimes, it takes years for people to arrive at the doorstep and say, you know what, okay, I think that I do want to convert to Islam. And that whole journey is fraught with challenges, fraught with difficulty, but also, extremely rewarding and beautiful. But then we hit stage 3, which is what I kind of want to talk about today, which is when you've actually made the decision to convert, and what happens to you once you sort of enter life, this new stage of life as a Muslim, and what happens to you, or what can happen to you, in the very early stages, and when you start interacting with the Muslim community, when you start, learning from Muslims themselves about this faith, and and part of the reason that this, is important to me is because I've become aware that I know this has been going on, but there are many more women, it seems to me, that are suffering these days, women converts, suffering from trauma, suffering from experiences that they had early in their conversion stage. And women are talking about it more and more, which is a good thing. I mean, I think in light of the the Me Too movement, and people's general awareness about women's rights and sexual abuse and these kinds of things, it's become something that women feel more comfortable talking about, and that's important. And I think that for women who have been through difficult experiences, it's natural that they embark on that journey where they're looking for something more beautiful, asking questions like, what is the purpose of life? Why am I here? What is out there? I've experienced as either a young person or somewhere in my life trauma or abuse at the hands of someone who had power over me, and seen something very ugly and experienced something very horrific. And so they are looking for something beautiful, something healing, something that can, help them make sense of things. And that's, I think, oftentimes when people do turn to Islam or have the opportunity to be open-minded towards that. And I have, for people who haven't listened to me before, I have spoken in the past also in these intros about the fact that I am also a survivor of that Me Too experience. And I want to share some stories about that, because, not about the trauma per se, but the experience of healing. Because I think it's important to try and put things in their proper perspective. And one of the things that has alarmed me about some of the Muslim convert women that are speaking out about their trauma is that they are not in a place of healing yet where they are able to, I think, present sort of a pathway for others. Like, they're still early in their healing stages, and hopefully, like, as I go through some of these examples, it'll become a little bit clearer what I mean. So I was recently, we get in contact with a lot of people who have, different issues or traumas or problems, and they're looking for solutions. And so there was one sister who, I had conversed with about trauma and some of the things that she was going through and how she was finding her way towards healing. And I really encouraged her, as I encourage, most people, to turn to God, turn to prayer, and all these kinds of things. And I think that she was not ready to hear some of the suggestions that I had, and I recognize that because I know when I was going through my own healing, there were times where I wasn't ready to hear what people had to say to me. So I got sort of accused of having experienced a miraculous healing. And I say accused for a couple of reasons. And she said to me, because of your miraculous healing, the consequence was you have the belief that there is a universal possibility of healing. And I understood she was saying this from a place of pain and from a place of trauma. And obviously she was suffering and kind of in a place where she felt like frustrated, and that maybe she wasn't healing, or that Islam, wasn't working for her. She had a lot of bitterness towards the Muslim community, because I think that, when you come as a convert, you have certain expectations, and especially if you're looking for healing and you're looking for comfort. When it's a natural thing to think, okay, I went through all of this hard work to become a convert, now I've arrived at the community, and I want to be welcomed, I want to be healed, I want to be loved, I want to be, surrounded by and supported. And oftentimes that really just doesn't happen. I mean, we know from, other conversations we've had here, And I think everyone probably knows converts that can say, you know, I went to the community, I was looking for belonging, I was looking for welcome. And for converts, oftentimes they don't get that, you know, and then they end up being very bitterly disappointed. And you know, it's a different thing to convert, especially if you're coming from like a, you know, Christian background, because it's not like you know, I imagine if you go to a church and you convert, you would have a very different experience. You have a community that's ready to welcome you. It's a really well-developed community. People can, you know, support you like quite generously. And here, because for Muslims, you know, we're still largely an immigrant, you know, thing, and we don't necessarily, we haven't been here that long, we haven't developed a lot of things. That's just not there. So the thing that just disturbed me was that, you know, a lot of times these people who are sharing their stories vent their frustrations, and they are talking about these traumas, and they're talking about how disappointed they are at the Muslim community. And, you know, and then they turn and blame Islam, and they blame the religion, and they blame God. And, you know, that's the issue that, you know, I have with sort of, you know, speaking about some of these issues. And I wanted to just share some stories of my own, some learnings that I had in my journey of healing, and also some, I think, important advice. So, you know, when the professor and I met, I was 29, and very early stage. I wasn't even aware at that point that I was a survivor of any kind of trauma. So there were certain, like, you know, strange things about me that kind of came out, and I'll give you some examples. One is that, you know, I've talked about how we met, and we were, like, the professor was living in this beautiful one-bedroom apartment full of books. It looked something like this. And, you know, you walk in and you see just all kinds of, like, beautiful, you know, books and trinkets and things that are lovely, and, come on in, and expressions of a unique personality. So if I walked into the professor's apartment, you know, I would see like little art forms and sculptures and, you know, like tapestries with Arabic and very beautiful items. And you walk in and you go, okay, this is the home of a scholar. This is someone who loves books. This is someone who, you know, has a rich history. If you walked into my apartment at that time, it was literally like blank. I had absolutely nothing on the walls. I had IKEA furniture, which, you know, is like super minimalist. I had like 4 chairs and a little table. I had a couch. I had an IKEA stand with my TV on it. Tiny little skinny bookcase with a few books on Islam. But no artwork, like nothing to express like any personality that I might have or anything that I would like. And I think it was jarring and it was shocking. This professor actually mentioned to me, you know, there's nothing here that sort of expresses what your personality is. And that was kind of strange, you know, for a 29-year-old not to have anything, not even like a picture of family or pictures of art or anything, is just kind of, you know, weird. And another example, well, okay, so let me start with that. So to back up, I want, you know, like the experience of trauma is something that you have to have gone through in order to be able to relate to. It's not something that I think you can talk about on a theoretical basis. So it's important that, you know, I wanted to say this because I've been through this experience, and I'm going to try and say some things that I hope will be meaningful to anyone who's gone through trauma. You know, especially it's, you know, I liken it to a beautiful glass vase. And if you hold like a crystal vase and you drop it and it shatters into a bunch of pieces, if that vase is like your soul, you know, it shatters when you go through a really extreme situation of trauma or abuse. And, you know, when the professor met me, in many ways, you could easily say that my soul had been murdered because, you know, when you go, for me, I was a child. And what ends up happening is you learn survival skills. If anyone has been through trauma, you know that oftentimes you have to split your emotion from what you are actually experiencing, you know, intellectually. And your soul sort of shatters into a bunch of different pieces. And you just survive. You have to be, you know, you have to do what you have to do. And you play roles that you need to play. You know, when you come to the point where you have to heal that, imagine trying to kind of take that broken crystal vase and try to put it back together, piece by piece, and so that you can become whole again. That's kind of like a representation of what it takes to heal. When you feel like your soul is murdered, you really are, and you come to the realization that you've gone through that experience. You go through a lot of emotions of anger and anxiety and pain and all of that. And I recognize that in a lot of the a lot of the things that are being shared by these Muslim women online. They've experienced emotions of extremity, and they're not able to, as what we're trying to do in Islam, find kind of the moderate path, right? And so that is, you're already sort of prone to not being calm, not being able to see things rationally, and recognizing that, if you recognize that you're a victim, you do go through sort of a period where you have to scream out and say, I'm a victim. I want people to know what I've been through. This is wrong. This is something that I need to heal from. And some of these stories. So excuse me. I'm just gonna. When I reached that point. And this was a very difficult test. I mean, I didn't realize that I had, I needed this type of healing until, after the professor and I had married. And this was a very difficult test for us because he was really my partner in healing. And so in a sense, when my sister says to me, okay, you had this miraculous healing, in a sense I did because I had the professor as a partner. And I saw that my path to healing was going to be very much about inviting God in, and I wanted to do this the right way. I wanted to do this Islamically. And, what was difficult is that I was stuck for a very long time in this idea of victimhood. Like, I am a victim, and I am not ready, to kind of move beyond that. And part of reclaiming myself was letting go and saying, okay, I'm ready. I remember that I contacted my family member, and my family member said to me, at some point you have to stop thinking of yourself as a victim, and you have to just start doing the hard work. And I recognized that when I wasn't ready to hear that, I was angry. And then when I started doing more hard work, it was, I realized I started to see change. What I wanted to say is the reason that I was really bothered by this idea of, you had a miraculous healing, I want to tell people, when you say you had a miraculous healing, it's almost like you are saying something happened that defied laws of nature and defied, like natural scientific laws, and that it was a very unlikely event that could happen. And, what was important for me is understanding that, I asked God, I invited God in, and I said, God, please heal me, please help me. And the professor, helped me in terms of understanding there's a lot of prayer and that goes on, a lot of fasting, a lot of talking to God, a lot of reflecting and all of that. And a lot of hard work. A lot of what I had to do as a convert to sort of reclaim my personality was also, aside from kind of the usual prayer stuff, is I had to sit and take a really detailed moral inventory of myself. I had to, people have this idea that once you convert, all of your sins are forgiven. And that's actually not really true, because I think that in order to have your sins forgiven, you have to actually be repentant. And in order to be repentant, you have to know what you're asking God for forgiveness for. So you can't just come in and go, oh God, I committed a lot of sins, please forgive me. You actually have to come in and say, God, I did this with this person or that person, or I hurt that person, And you have to be very specific about what you're asking God for forgiveness for. So, part of my healing was literally writing down every single person that either I had hurt or sinned against, what I did, and taking full accountability of what I did. That's not miraculous healing. That's hard work. And that's really, really difficult work. It's very similar to what people talk about like at AA. If you go to Alcoholics Anonymous or any of these sorts of anonymous groups, they take you through the 12 steps. And one of the steps is doing a really detailed moral inventory of everyone you've ever hurt and what your own accountability was in that. In addition, early on, I had you know, we were married, Sharif was really young, our son was like 7. Every time after he would go to bed, it would be 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, and then I had to start my training program. I would run literally a mile or 2 miles every single night. I would do exercises. I would, during that time, be asking Allah for forgiveness, focusing on my sins, trying to imagine, like, you know, what, trying to really reclaim, like, you know, what do you think God wants from you? Who are you? You know, and through this process also writing a lot about, you know, what are your, you know, I mean, just really understanding, like, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses and what have you, you know, done. It's kind of like literally cleaning house. And we would often talk about the, you know, like a lot of times when people commit sins or when they convert and they're like, you know, running away from something, or they kind of like say, okay, I've been forgiven. I'm not going to think about what I've done anymore. It's done. I'm starting fresh. Problem is when you have done certain things, you have certain tendencies. If you are, you know, if you tend to lie, if you tend to shortcut things, just because you're forgiven and you haven't owned up to that behavior, you're going to do it again, you know? And so it's important to really, like, know who you are. So, excuse me, just going to say, so, you know, I put together kind of, you know, there's a lot that can be said, obviously, in a 15-minute, you know, introduction. You can't really address the whole issue of sexual trauma and all of that. The most important thing that I just wanted to say to Muslim convert women, and, you know, or any person of trauma, is that healing is a really long and arduous process that, Michelle, I'll tell you one more story. When the professor and I met, when I converted to Islam actually, there was a gentleman who took my shahada. And after I became Muslim, he actually was very nice and tried to guide me, you know, through sort of the early stages. And he would take me to dinner and start telling me about Islam and, you know, every little thing. Of course, he had to tell me I had to wear hijab, and, you know, we would go and have dinner together, and if we didn't, you know, like finish food, he would say, oh, well, let's finish this because, you know, Muslims don't waste food, you know. And every, like, little thing that we would do came with a little explanation about what Muslims do. And he was an engineer turned self-declared scholar. So you know, but he was a very nice man, and I appreciated him because he took my shahada. So when I met the professor, I thought, you know, I really wanted to have this person over for dinner because it would, you know, he was so nice to me in my early stages. And so he came to dinner, he came to the apartment and met the professor's mother, and sat with us, and he was extremely uncomfortable. I was excited to have him over because it's like, to me, he was someone who was knowledgeable, and he presented himself as sort of a scholar, and I thought, oh, wonderful, I'll connect the scholars, and they'll really enjoy talking about the books and seeing the books and stuff. And when he came, he was really like, just like shocked to see the books, and felt very uncomfortable, and just, you know, couldn't wait to leave. And the next day, he called me on the phone, and he said, you know, I've been checking around, and I just want to tell you, Khalid Abou El Fadl may not be who you think he is. And so I just want you to be careful that, you know, and he knew that we were engaged. And so, you know, to call me after having had dinner with us, that was really shocking. So I mentioned it to the professor, and the professor said to me, you know, that's really not right. I mean, Islamically, you can't have someone over to your home and welcome them into your house, and then they call you the next day and backstab, you know, your fiance. So you really should call him, and you should tell him that, you know, was really not nice, or just make a comment about that. And I could not, for the life of me, do it. I did not have it in me. Like today, I could stand and say, you know, I don't know, that was what you were thinking, that was really rude, you know, I could stand up for myself. But back then, I didn't have the ability to even stand up for myself and even call him and say, you know what, that was really not cool. Like, we tried for like hours and hours, and I couldn't pick up the phone. And that is just an indication of where I was, like, as far as my own development as a person. I didn't believe that I had the worth or the, you know, the strength or anything like that. You know, a little later, as we, you know, went through this process, even things like, you know, we tried to have, the professor tried to have a birthday party for me, a surprise birthday party for me, and I walked in the house and people were like, surprise! And I was like, oh my God, and I ran into the bedroom because I felt like really uncomfortable, you know, being celebrated. I didn't feel like I was worth that, you know? So when I look at like my journey from that to where I am today, where I can actually stand up here and talk about, you know, these kinds of experiences, you know, I hope that everything that we do here at Usuli kind of emphasizes in one way, shape, or form the power that you get from, you know, like finding out who you are and what your strengths are and developing your knowledge and building a relationship with God to the extent that you can feel like rediscover your purpose and rediscover, you know, the gifts that God gave you. And so, you know, I hope that, you know, when women are struggling with faith and struggling with the idea that Islam somehow cannot heal them, I would just say, please give it some time. And you have to invite God in, and as soon as you invite God in, you're on God's time frame. You're not on your own time frame anymore. So, you know, when I was on this journey and I said, okay, God, I really want your help, all of a sudden everything changed in the sense that I had so many experiences where God was like, okay, you said you want my help. Here's your choices. Do this or do that. You have a window of opportunity. If you really want this, take it. And you know, this happens so many times, even if it was something as simple as, okay, you're going home to your parents, they're going to give you a glass of wine for dinner, tell them no. And for me at that moment, it was like, oh my God, no, I can't. That is just so hard for me to do. But I knew in my heart that that was the right decision. And so it's like God puts you in this situation where you have uncomfortable choices or, you know, an alternative which is not acceptable. And it's like these little tests that, you know, that you can handle, but they're uncomfortable. And you're telling God, okay, I can pass that test. Okay, I can develop a little bit more. I can grow a little bit more. And now 25 years later, I mean, it's like literally 2 decades of, I've been a convert for 25 years, and it took me 2 decades to even feel like a whole person, like that glass, you know, vase could even be like hold water. But I never felt like I could say anything to share until I had something to offer. And so to the women who feel like they really want to share this story, it's fine, share it, but be careful not to generalize your experience to like all converts. And that, you know, I have to say, like when I see women saying, oh, see, Islam is just a religion like any other religion, it's just a set of tools, because that was her experience, but she tries to tell people that. It's really important to recognize, you know, you have to be careful what you say, because whatever you say, you know, God will hold you accountable for your representation of Islam and where you are. And so anyway, just to say, you know, I've come such a long way. I hope that, you know, I can share more examples and let people know that, you know, there is hope at the end of the tunnel, and that, you know, when you invite God in, that, you know, you have to just pay attention to the signs and follow the, you know, the things, the opportunities that God gives you to grow and to develop, and that you can find your way forward. So, you know, the challenge of becoming Muslim was so difficult, and this whole journey, I mean, it's like the whole journey as a Muslim is difficult and challenging, but very rewarding, and you wouldn't expect it to be any other way. Like, it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, I sacrificed all this just to become Muslim, and now I've crossed the finish line. You know, I'm on easy street now. It just is a different set of challenges, but the ultimate goal is kind of finding yourself and your purpose and your way forward as a sustainable Muslim. So hopefully we can talk about more steps later. But that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, do you have pictures of, do you have videos of some of the orphans in Syria?
I do. Let me get that. Let me pull it up.
I want Grace to show you some of the videos of the orphans in Idlib. I mean, it's mind-numbing to wonder what would happen to these children if there wasn't just someone who decided to, on their own initiative, to take care of these children. And it's hard to see the faces of these orphans and not think of your own children.
I keep getting my dog video. Okay, hold on. Here we go.
Good morning. How are you?
That was going with these guys are, let me bring another one. They also like go around and they save animals as well. And they post regular videos on, so you can see like where the, let me just see. You can see where they go to school, what the orphanage looks like. They're really committed to like having smiles. You know, they always say that they want to have smiles on their children's faces.
Also, there was one of the...
Everyone, hello all my friends from all over the world. Now we are in the camp in the north in Syria. Inshallah, we will distribute new shoes for children in the camp, inshallah, because winter is very near. Thank you very much all my friends from all over.
So this is, they had bought like, a bunch of shoes. And you see the conditions that they live in. It's really just heartbreaking. But the kids are just smiling and they're singing and they're laughing, and it's really just to the credit of the adults that are taking care of them. And you hear bombing in the background, and, you know.
You know that the Quran could not have emphasized taking care of orphans as more than it did. And if you want a path for healing, a path for Allah to bless your life, I mean, I often think instead of creating these social media sites where you talk about your pain, you want your pain to heal, take care of orphans. You know, instead of the ana, the I, being the center of your universe, diffuse yourself in the smile of orphan children, and you will see the way that your heart heals, and the way that your soul heals, and the way that your life changes. I mean, these children, getting shoes is an event. One of them needed an operation with like needles for his leg, and so you know someone donated the money, and then they had the operation, and then you see the child sitting and smiling and sending videos saying thank you, and this is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, as I get older in life, I develop less and less tolerance for didactic intellectualism and وكان الإنسان أكثر شيء جدلا. Human beings just are so self-absorbed, so self-centered, and they love argumentation. They love to argue, and they love to talk in order to affirm the self and elevate the self to levels where it becomes a center of the universe, effectively replacing the divine with the self. Well, the way you heal that is to take care of orphans in a very pragmatic, practical way, because it forces you, and I'm not talking about giving what is extra. I am talking about sacrificing your own needs for them, cutting down on what things you want, things that you actually want to spend on, to prefer others over yourself, and that will heal. It's very, it's to think of the children that they could not help. That keeps me up at night. To think of the children that they could not help. It reminded me there was, what's the woman's name that the Egyptian government had imprisoned and Ayah Ghazi. Ayah Ghazi and her friends, they had a program where they went to the street children in Egypt, and they created basically, effectively, an orphanage for street children in Egypt. And they started showing these children love, education, care. And I heard Ayah Ghazi in an interview, and she was talking about how every child on the streets of Cairo, these are children that were dumped, basically born and dumped, that every single one of these child, male or female, had been sexually assaulted. Every one of them was raped. And raped sometimes by the police and sometimes by non-police. And that all the children had hardened because they were repeatedly raped, and because no one has ever shown them love. They've never had a mother, they've never had a father. But what really struck me was that she was talking about how when they started providing these children with classes and clothes and food and love, and they used to call her Mama Aya. They would start calling her Mama. That they became children. And then, of course, what did the government do? They arrested Ayah Ghazi, and they arrested all the people who were working on the project, because the government didn't want the street children to become human beings. These street children, they grow up, they become extremely violent, they become criminals, and then the government uses them to oppress and repress the opposition in Egypt. So these are when they grow up, they carry knives, matawi, and then they're the ones who, when there's a demonstration, they intermingle with the demonstration, and then suddenly they cut you. So you're demonstrating, and suddenly someone stabs you in the back, and it's these street children who are cultivated by the government as they grow up, and their cruelty is utilized to keep the government in power. So of course they arrested Ayah Ghazi, arrested all the people that were working with the street children, and they confiscated their money. It reminded me, I mean, again, it's the stories of healing. When I was an adolescent, I mean, I was, I think, 15 or 14. One of my teachers would emphasize this lesson and say, you want tawbah, you want ghufran, you want taqarrub, qurb min Allah, to be close to Allah, to become a Khalilullah, to become a friend of Allah. You will not achieve this just sitting in the halaqas with your books. You're not going to achieve this with all the sunan that you pray or all the sawm that you do. You do all of that, plus you go out and extend kindness to someone in the streets. So I had to make a long story short. I had several assignments, so in Egypt, if you go to restaurants, sometimes when you go to the restroom, you'll find someone there that will just hand you literally a napkin to dry your hands with. Like you wash your hand, and you're supposed to tip this person. Now, a lot of restaurants, these people who, not the high-class restaurants, the middle class and lower classes restaurants, the people who are in the restrooms that hand you the napkin to dry your hand, they're usually street children. So I went to the restaurant and I found a kid who looked like a street child, and he handed me a napkin. And then I said, I started asking him, how does he make money? And we started talking. He took me to, of course he lived in one of the shanty towns in Egypt. Horrible, no bathroom, no running water, electricity that was stolen from a building through wires. Horrible. The smell was awful. This is where that kid lived. And my Sheikh Eid Allah had said that before you talk to them about Islam or about Shahada or about Salah, or you feed them, you take care of them. Don't talk to them about any of this until you feed them and you take care of them. And when this kid started telling me about his life, how he's grown up, what he has experienced, the number of times that he had been beaten up in the street, the number of times that he's been sexually assaulted, the number of times that people have tried to force him into prostitution. You talk about healing, then you're ashamed. You're ashamed to complain about anything. You're ashamed to sit there and say, me, ana, I feel this, I want this, why am I not getting what I want? It is when Islam motivates you to become a power for good, for ihsan, you can't sit there and say, I've been hurt, and by hurt, and you sit complaining on social media and chatting with other people about how you've been hurt. You want, and then blame Islam for not somehow miraculously coming in and changing your life. You want to heal? Islam gives you the power by Allah telling you, if you are in the aid of others, I will be in your aid. But if you sit there and you don't help others, and you want Allah somehow to just say, okay, well, I'm going to help you anyway. This is just what you talked about. Before we start the Surah Layl, some of you have, of course, some of you have heard the khutbah I gave yesterday, and because of the interest of various people about the Muslim ban, I want us to say a few words about the Muslim ban, because the article that I was commenting about was either reckless or woefully ignorant about various things that surround the Muslim ban. So in response to various people that have wrote me and said, well, what is the deal with the Muslim ban? Because what they are hearing from, unfortunately, folks in Zaytuna and is a whitewash. People will tell them, well, no, the Muslim ban is not really a Muslim ban. It's not really anything that we Muslims should be upset about. It's okay. That's as a lawyer, as a law professor, it is unconscionable. Unconscionable. Okay, the article and other lectures that I've heard from the Zaytuna folks, and I can't believe it. I don't know what is wrong with these people. Is that the Muslim ban is not a Muslim ban, A, and B, that it doesn't involve civil rights and it doesn't involve human rights because the U.S. is a sovereign country. And as a sovereign country, it has the right to accept or not accept immigrants as it sees fit. And as such, we as U.S. citizens should not be upset about the U.S.'s immigration policies because the U.S. as a sovereign country has a right to adopt whatever immigration policies and laws it desires. And we as U.S. citizens should be fine with that. Because, again, why shouldn't the U.S. have the right to say we don't want people from Yemen, or we don't want people from Somalia, or we don't want people from Iran, or we don't want people from Syria, or we don't want people from Venezuela, or we don't want people from North Korea. Okay, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but again, because there's a lot of confusion by kids about the Muslim ban. First, the United States is a signatory to an international treaty called the Refugee Convention. As a signatory, this is the treaty that we signed and ratified. As a signatory to this international treaty, we are obligated as a country not to close the doors to political asylees who qualify under the terms of the Refugee Convention to apply for asylum in the U.S. So if they fulfill the terms of the convention, we, the United States, are obligated under international law to not exclude all refugees. So that's one. Furthermore, under international law, under the United Nations Charter, under various human rights treaties like the Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, under the Refugee Convention itself, we, the United States, are obligated not to discriminate against refugees on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. So in other words, you have the right to say, I'm going to limit the number of refugees I take. But you don't have the right to say, under international law, I'm not going to take any refugees. Or to say, I'm going to take refugees, but I'm going to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, or ethnicity, or national origin. This is not just international law, by the way. But there's also an American statute. There's an American law, a provision of the INA, that says the American government is not allowed to discriminate on the basis of religion, race, or ethnicity in its immigration policies. There is a provision of the INA that had not been used for ages and that Trump's lawyers discovered and relied on, that says in the case of national emergency, in the case of exceptional circumstance, the president may issue an executive order that basically suspends immigration laws passed by Congress as long as these exigencies, as long as these special circumstances continue. Now, legally, even if the president relies on this provision, the president cannot violate either international law or constitutional law by discriminating on the basis of race, religion, or ethnicity. So you can't say, we will only admit whites, or we will only admit Christians, or we will only admit whatever. Why do we have these laws? Why did Congress pass this law? Congress passed this law because for many years our immigration laws were race-based. We only admitted whites, we discriminated against blacks, and discriminated against Asians. And we also, for most of our American history, until 1965, we also discriminated against Muslims. Until 1965, Muslims were considered, we couldn't decide whether Muslims were whites or non-whites. When Muslims were considered whites, we would let them in. When Muslims were not considered whites, we would not let them in. And there's a lot of cases. Interestingly, it was in 1965, a petitioner, a Saudi Arabian, who petitioned the court, said, I'm a Muslim, but as a Muslim I am white. And there was a court that agreed, and so and that's why technically we still consider Middle Easterners whites, if you wonder the genesis of the law. Anyway, but eventually there was a civil rights movement and a human rights movement, and Congress realized that discriminating on the basis of religion, race, ethnicity is unconstitutional. Now, importantly, people, the executive order that became known as a Muslim ban had several reiterations. Initially, Trump, during his election campaign, promised not to admit Muslims to the country, period, to exclude all Muslims. And when he was elected president, he brought in his advisors, Islamophobes like Michael Flynn and Bannon and others, and they started thinking about, okay, so how can we ban Muslims from coming to the country? He was told, and all of this is documented, he was told, you cannot do that constitutionally. So instead of saying we're banning Muslims, can we name Muslim countries and ban Muslims this way? So instead of saying we don't want Muslims, instead we say we don't want Egyptians, we don't want Syrians, we don't want Yemenis. In other words, we name all the countries that Muslims come from. Initially, he was told, yes, but if you name all the Muslim countries, that will create political problems with certain allies like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, countries that we like and we need. So he said, well, okay, so how about naming a bunch of Muslim countries and not including in the list countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, countries that we consider to be allies. But effectively, lowering the number of immigration by Muslims to the United States by naming as many Muslim countries as we can. Now there is a problem. how about Christians that live in Muslim countries? So they said, okay, well, why don't we create an exception? So we ban people from Egypt, for instance, but we create an exception that if you are a minority in a Muslim country, i.e. Christian, you can still come. So the first executive order, that's how it was drafted. And it became very clear that that's unconstitutional. Because everyone saw through it. Everyone, clearly, you're trying to just simply lower the number of Muslims that come to this country, and you're creating an exception for Christians. After a bunch of constitutional challenges, in which people like me were involved, and people from Zaytuna were not involved, because if you go the Zaytuna route, you'll sit there as you get smacked on your face, and you say it's a Christian thing. You give them your other side, it's very Christian. If they strike you on one side of your face, give them the other side. SubhanAllah, Zaytuna is as Christian as you get. So if it was these people, they weren't there. None of the legal work which was done was they involved. They were just saying bravo to Trump. That's all they do. That's why this article is outrageous. Because it was like, thanks to people like myself, that the first executive order was struck down. Not to the Zaytuna folks. So Trump went back to the drawing board. Okay, let's try the number 2 executive order. Remember, this is not the first executive order. Number 2 executive orders. Let's take the Christian exception out, and let's lower the number of Muslim countries. So remove some Muslim countries. And of course, someone said, well, why don't we add a couple of non-Muslim countries to make it look like it's not anti-Islamic? It's not genius lawyering. It's not brilliance. Which countries do you add? The countries in which we, the State Department, doesn't give any visas to. North Korea and Venezuela. We had not given any visas to Venezuelans or North Koreans unless they were political dissidents, and that's not even 100 visas a year. So you're adding countries in which there's no immigration from anyway. That second executive order was still unconstitutional because of the language was anti-Islamic. The third executive order was cleansed of its anti-Islamic language, and a few countries like Iraq were removed, and you kept countries like Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and so on. Even then, because the legislative history of that executive order, in other words, the history of the administrative act, it's not really, I'm just calling it legislative to explain the process. But because of the rhetoric that went on behind that legislative order, the executive order, the third one, everyone still thought it was unconstitutional. And every court in which it was challenged struck it down as unconstitutional. Why unconstitutional? Because it was the language used to justify the issuing of that third executive order was rabidly anti-Islamic. It was explicitly, we want to lessen the number of Muslims coming to this country. The Supreme Court, because of the politics of the Supreme Court, surprised all the circuits by reversing all the circuits that struck down the executive order as unconstitutional, and in a very narrow decision decided that it is constitutional. In a decision 5-4. 4 hardline conservative judges, and 4 not even liberal. You can't count, there's no liberals on the Supreme Court. They're just moderates. And a swing vote. A vote that could have gone either this way or that way. Importantly, that vote that decided that it is constitutional relied on what? On the fact that the opinion of the Supreme Court makes it very clear. They say we don't agree with Trump's anti-Muslim animus. They concede that Trump, in his election campaign and in the history of the executive order, is Islamophobic. They call it an anti-Muslim animus. You see, we don't challenge that. But that, according to the majority opinion, but that is not our issue. Our issue is that it is facially neutral, meaning the language itself of the official third executive order doesn't say anything about Islam. It just names certain Muslim countries. For the swing vote, for the guy who voted to make it 5 against 4, he said, it makes all the difference to me that there is a provision in the executive order for exceptions that allow us to look on a case-by-case basis for humanitarian exceptions. And if it hadn't been for the exception provisions, I would agree it's unconstitutional. So in other words, that all Syrians, you cannot come to the U.S., but we are going to look at case-by-case basis to decide whether you should get an exception or not. For the swing vote, that saved the neutrality of the executive order. Does everyone follow me? The problem is this. Since the Supreme Court upheld the executive order, the executive branch has not granted the exceptions. So it's just formality on paper. Which means that all the families that have been separated, who are from Iran, or from Yemen, or from Syria, or from Somalia, you're out of luck. So a lot of people who were married, wanted to bring their wife from Iran, wanted to bring their wife from Yemen, wanted to, parents and children wanted to reunite, siblings, etc., etc. All of them were out of luck. And the exceptions are not granted. Now, for us to pretend that this is not a Muslim ban, what are we doing? Who will protect your rights if you as Muslims don't protect your own rights? Yani, when I work on this issue, I work with Jews and Christians, mostly. Jews and Christians. Jews and Christians know that this is a Muslim ban. I swear by Allah, Wallahi al-Azim, all the people that are working to protect the civil rights of Muslims in the United States, all of them that I work with are Jews and Christians. I haven't seen a Muslim face around. And I am ashamed. I didn't even want to, I didn't want to, if I showed one of the lawyers that I work with that article, wallahi, I wouldn't have the face, I wouldn't be able to show my face. Because they're working very hard to say we don't want to live in a country that discriminates against Muslims, and then they find a representative of the only Muslim academic institution in this country saying, no, it's okay to discriminate against us. We like being smacked on the head. It's okay to degrade us. We're Muslims. We love it. What do you say? You mean, there were numerous demonstrations before and after the Supreme Court decisions where we worked primarily with non-Muslims. All the activists, all the organizers, all the people who prepare the amicus briefs, all the people who are monitoring the way that the government is implementing this law. The government, this government, is violating the Constitution by violating the provisions of separation of church and state by clearly preferring Christianity in its immigration policies. Who's challenging that? Who's saying you cannot give preference to Christianity? You have to treat Islam and Christianity equally. Not the Zaytuna folks, me, and people like me. And the people like me are not Christian and are not Muslim. They're Christian and Jews. So shut up. If you're ignorant and an idiot, and I mean it, people get offended that I call people idiots. No, they're idiots. They're idiots. Because if they're not idiots, they're worse. So I'm kind to them by saying you're idiots. You're not worse. Hopefully. We're working very hard to preserve the civil rights of Muslims in this country. And it's not Muslims that I work with. Then you have these, I don't know what you call them. What do you call them? You cannot lower. I don't care if you as a Muslim don't care about your own rights and you love to be degraded, that's your business. You know, if you're into masochism, go for it. You know, hire someone to whip you and flog you and have all the fun you want. But the country I live in, I want to live in a country that protects civil rights. A country that separates religion from the state. A country that doesn't give preference to one religion over another, whether that religion is Islam or Christianity. And the country that I want to live in is when I see the government abusing its power by giving preference to one religion over another in immigration issues, is a country where I can hold the government accountable. You want to live in a medieval kingdom where the king is your god? Go immigrate to Saudi or the Emirat, worship the king as you like. We here are a country of rights and laws and the rule of law. You love Mauritania so much and the Emirat so much and Saudi so much, go live there. Go worship your king. Make him your ilah. Here we are a country of laws. And that is what I live by. And I live by that from the basis of my Islamic ethics. Because this is what Islam raises me to fully embrace rights and justice. Rights and justice, we don't worship kings. We don't say, oh, whatever you want, your majesty. We don't do that. I can forgive a professor in Egypt who can't say a word because he's afraid he'll be tortured. I can forgive a professor in Saudi. I can forgive a professor in the United Arab Emirates. But I cannot forgive a professor in the United States. Because there's no cost. You're worshiping the government for nothing. So that they just can give you a little bit of extra money, so that they can invite you to the White House breakfast, so that you can get a little bit of praise. If you want to worship your king, this is the country of rule of law. This is the country of rights. Don't tell me the Muslim ban doesn't involve civil rights or human rights and pretend to represent what the United States stands for. Okay. Okay, let's take it. I mean, you know, lawyers think in terms of billables. When I think of how many hours, what could have been billable hours, have spent defending the rights of Muslims, and then you see Muslims acting like losers, like that, you're full of rage. I mean, I can't calculate the number of hours. If you would have done commercial cases or international arbitrations, you would have been compensated for your hours handsomely. But instead you decide to, I will work with non-Muslims out of principle. It is outrageous. It is beyond comprehension or belief or understanding. Yeah.
What I see about the conferences about the National Association for Muslim Lawyers, like, where are they contributing?
Muslim lawyers are mostly out to make good salaries and buy fancy cars and fancy homes, and yeah, the proof is in the pudding. Okay, how many people are doing pro bono work in these civil rights cases? For all the Muslim lawyers that sit there and pontificate on social media, when it comes to where the rubber meets the road, they're not there. So my response to all the pontifications is shut up. You either show up where it matters, you contribute actual energy and effort and time, you do the hard work that you do for when you serve your clients when you're billing. You do the research, you write the memos, you do the filings, or either that or just shut up. Because all your pontifications about Islam, I can do without. Let's take 5 minutes. I can't deal with the Quran when I'm so heated.